The twin suns of the Xilari homeworld cast an eerie glow over the execution square, bathing the towering obsidian spires in deep crimson light. Hundreds of Xilari nobles lined the balconies, their chitinous armor gleaming, their sharp mandibles clicking in anticipation. In the plaza below, thousands of enslaved humans were forced to kneel, their heads bowed under the weight of years of oppression. At the center of the stage stood Elias Cade, stripped to the waist, his body a map of scars and bruises from weeks of torture. Shackles bound his wrists and ankles, linked to a monolithic pillar inscribed with alien runes, a grim monument to those who had defied the dominion before him. A Xilari executioner loomed nearby, gripping a plasma glaive that shimmered with a deadly blue glow. The supreme warlord himself watched from a towering throne of polished bone, his four eyes unblinking. The broadcast screens flickered to life across the city. Millions of humans across the Dominion's empire would see this moment, a warning to all who dared resist. Let it be known, the supreme warlord's voice boomed through the plaza, cold and commanding, that the rebellion ends today. Humanity's last defiant leader falls beneath the weight of our dominion, and with him, the last hope of your kind. Cade lifted his head, locking eyes with the warlord. There was no fear in his gaze, only the quiet, unyielding resolve of a man who had already accepted death long ago. The executioner stepped forward, raising the glaive high. Silence fell over the plaza. The moment stretched, the crowd savoring the impending finality of it. Then the world exploded. A massive detonation erupted beneath the plaza, sending slabs of alien stone hurtling through the air. Fire and smoke swallowed the stage as shockwaves rippled through the city. Screams of panic filled the air as Xilari guards were thrown like ragdolls, their exoskeletal bodies cracking against the walls. In the chaos, concealed explosives planted days before detonated across the capital, targeting key power grids and communication hubs. The city's defenses flickered and dimmed. From the smoke, figures emerged, human insurgents, clad in scavenged Xilari armor and wielding stolen plasma rifles. The rebellion had come. A rebel soldier slid onto the platform, hacking through Cade's shackles with a laser cutter. "Commander, we're here to." Cade didn't wait for him to finish. Wrenching the broken shackles from his wrists, he grabbed the executioner's discarded plasma glaive and spun, slicing through the throat of a stunned Xilari guard. "I can see that," he said, breathing hard. "Now get me a gun." The rebel tossed him a plasma pistol just as more Xilari soldiers poured in from the outer gates. The execution square was no longer a stage for a public death. It was a battlefield. The supreme warlord, still seated above, stared down in shock. This was impossible. The rebellion was supposed to be broken. Their leader was meant to die here. Cade aimed his plasma pistol straight at the throne, smirking. Not today. With that, the battle truly began. The capital burned. Smoke curled into the sky as distant explosions rocked the city, each detonation another dagger in the Xilari Dominion's grip over humanity. Elias Cade sprinted through the war-torn streets, his plasma pistol still hot in his grip. Behind him, his strike team followed, darting between the wreckage of shattered buildings as Xilari patrols scrambled to contain the chaos. The plan had worked, mostly. Cade was free, but the enemy would soon tighten their defenses. If they didn't escape now, the rebellion's greatest victory would turn into a massacre. "This way," barked Riker, his second in command, waving the team toward a ruined sky bridge. The structure groaned under their weight as they crossed, fires raging below. A Xilari gunship screamed overhead, its searchlights cutting through the dust and smoke. Cade barely had time to duck as energy bolts slammed into the bridge, melting steel and sending debris tumbling. The bridge shuddered, then collapsed entirely. Cade and his team leaped just in time, crashing onto a lower rooftop. He rolled to his feet, grimacing. "Tell me our ride is still waiting, Riker." "Still en route," Riker confirmed, checking his wrist comm. "ETA, 2 minutes." "That's about a minute too long," muttered Leora Vex, the ex-captive captain they had rescued alongside Cade. She held a stolen auxiliary rifle, her hand steady despite the blood staining her uniform. More auxiliary troops flooded the streets below, their chitinous armor gleaming in the firelight. Cade glanced over the edge of the building. There was no way down that wouldn't get them torn apart. They were boxed in. Then, from the distant skyline, a low roar echoed across the city. A dark shape emerged from the smoke, a massive angular ship descending rapidly toward them. The Vengeance, their stolen warship, barely more than a rusted wreck when they had first found it. Now, outfitted with scavenged auxiliary technology and human ingenuity, it was a ghost in the void. Unregistered, unpredictable, and unrelenting. "Hold on," Riker shouted. The Vengeance pivoted sharply, its ventral bay doors sliding open. Twin rail cannons thundered, shredding the auxiliary gunship above. As burning wreckage plummeted, Cade and his team sprinted forward. The ship's engines howled as it hovered just meters away from the rooftop's edge. "Jump." Cade didn't hesitate. He sprinted full speed and leaped. For a moment, he was weightless, the burning city below stretching infinitely. Then his hands caught the outstretched grip of a rebel soldier inside the bay. He was hauled aboard just as Riker and Leora followed, the last members of the strike team barely making it before the doors slammed shut. "Get us out of here," Cade roared. The Vengeance banked hard, thrusters flaring as it shot skyward. Enemy fighters scrambled to pursue, but their targeting systems flickered, disrupted by the ship's stolen auxiliary cloaking field. In seconds, the rebels vanished into the night. As the capital dwindled behind them, Cade exhaled. The Dominion had thought him dead. Now, they would learn the truth. The Ghost Rebellion had just begun. The Vengeance cut through the void like a phantom, its hull patched together from stolen auxiliary plating and human engineering. It had no transponder, no official records. To the Dominion, it didn't exist, and that made it the most dangerous ship in the sector. Elias Cade leaned over the holographic display in the war room, his eyes locked on the asteroid prison looming ahead. Officially, it was called Varkos Prime, but among the enslaved humans, it had another name, the Graveyard. No one had ever escaped Varkos Prime, and tonight, Cade planned to prove the impossible could be done twice. Security Grid is running full spectrum scans every 30 seconds, Leora Vex reported, her hands flying across the stolen auxiliary control panel. Gun emplacements on the outer ring, automated turrets along every docking port. If we get too close, they'll turn us into dust before we land. "Not if we use the ghost trick," Riker said with a smirk. Cade nodded. Their stolen auxiliary cloaking tech was unreliable, but it had kept them alive this long. He turned to the pilot. "Bring us in slow. We slip through their grid, land undetected, and get our people out before they realize what hit them." The pilot, a wiry engineer named Vale, gave a thumbs up. "Just don't make me do any fancy flying inside a rock, Commander." Cade smirked. No promises. As the Vengeance crept toward the asteroid, the crew fell silent. Everyone knew what was at stake. The Dominion had been crushing resistance cells across the galaxy, and if the rebellion had any hope of turning the tide, they needed soldiers, thousands of them. Varkos Prime held humanity's best warriors, the ones too dangerous for the auxiliary to simply execute. The ship slid through the outer security field without triggering alarms. The cloaking was working. "So far. Found us a landing spot," Vale murmured. "Secondary ventilation shaft. Big enough to squeeze through. Leads straight to the lower detention blocks." "Perfect," Cade said. "Gear up. We move fast. ####. They dropped into the prison's industrial underbelly, landing in a dimly lit corridor choked with steam. Cade led the way, his plasma pistol raised. The team moved swiftly, bypassing security nodes with stolen auxiliary codes. Then they reached the first cell block, and everything changed. The cells weren't just cages, they were operating rooms. Rows of human prisoners lay strapped to slabs, their bodies grafted with alien machinery, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Some twitched, barely conscious. Others didn't move at all. "What the hell is this?" Riker whispered. Lyora's face was pale. "They're experimenting on them." Before Cade could respond, a prisoner suddenly jerked upright, their metal-clad arm twitching. Then their head snapped toward Cade, and they screamed. Alarms blared. "Move," Cade shouted. The rescue mission had just turned into a nightmare. The alarm klaxons shrieked through the corridors of Varkos Prime, bathing the walls in pulsing red light. The prisoner's scream still echoed in Cade's ears, unnatural and distorted, like something broken trying to speak. Then it moved. The cybernetic monstrosity lunged from the operating slab, metal limbs snapping unnaturally as it charged. Cade barely sidestepped as a razor-sharp arm blade slashed past his throat. A single plasma bolt from Riker sent the thing stumbling back, but it didn't fall. It barely even reacted. "These aren't just prisoners," Leora said, eyes wide as more of them stirred in their restraints. "They're turning them into something else." "No time to analyze it," Cade snapped, raising his pistol. "We move. Now." The team sprinted through the cell block as automated doors hissed open, releasing more prisoners. No, more things, into the corridors. Some were barely recognizable as human, their bodies twisted with ciliary grafts, glowing veins of energy pulsing beneath their skin. One of them, a towering brute with reinforced plating over its skull, let out a guttural roar and charge. Vale fired a volley from his rifle, but the creature barely slowed. Cade gritted his teeth, grabbed a plasma grenade from his belt, and hurled it at the brute's chest. The explosion sent it crashing backward, but even as its body smoldered, its fingers still twitched. "That's not natural," Riker growled. "Which is why we're getting the hell out of here," Cade shot back. "Leora, find us another route." She was already working, her cybernetic implants flickering as she hacked into the prison systems. "There's a secondary hangar bay 2 levels down, low security, meant for waste disposal ships. We can take it and exfiltrate before Dominion reinforcements arrive." Cade nodded. "Then that's our way out. Move." They barreled through the corridors, dodging automated turrets and patrol drones now flooding the halls. Plasma bolts sizzled past them as the prison's full security force engaged, but Cade's team fought like men possessed. Every shot counted. Every move was precise. The Exilari may have been stronger, but humans had always been more relentless. They reached the final sector, but the door to the hangar remained sealed. Leora slammed her hands against the access panel, her cybernetic eyes flickering as she forced an override. "Almost. Got it," she muttered. A metallic screech filled the corridor behind them. Cade turned just in time to see the brute from earlier, still burning, still alive, charging straight for them. "Cover her," Cade shouted. Vale and Riker opened fire, but the creature didn't stop. It lunged, claws extended. Leora turned, her implants glowing impossibly bright, and the brute stopped mid-charge. It froze, trembling violently, before its head snapped backward with a sickening crack. Its entire body spasmed, then collapsed in a heap. Everyone turned to Leora. Her breathing was ragged, her hands shaking. I didn't mean to." Cade's stomach twisted. The implants. The cybernetics. She had connected to it. And now she was hearing something else. "They know we're here," Leora whispered, horror in her voice. The Dominion was coming. Leora staggered back, her breath shallow, her hands shaking as though something invisible was pulling at her. Cade grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to meet his gaze. "What do you mean? They know we're here." She squeezed her eyes shut, her cybernetic implants flickering wildly. "The Xilari, their network. I touched it, just for a second. They felt me." Her voice was strained, as if something was still clawing at the edges of her mind. "They know everything. Our location, our ship, our names." "Then we're out of time," Riker snapped, spinning toward the sealed hangar door. "Leora, you gotta open this now." She didn't answer, still shaking, locked in some silent battle with whatever had just invaded her mind. The screech of approaching Silari soldiers echoed through the corridors. Heavy footsteps. Armed patrols. The Dominion's response team was closing in fast. Cade gritted his teeth. "Vale, plant charges on that door. We're blowing it open." Vale hesitated. That could vent the whole hangar bay. "Do it." Vale swore under his breath but obeyed, slapping detonation packs onto the thick metal door. He had just finished when a squad of Silari rounded the corner. Cade barely had time to react before plasma fire erupted. He dove for cover as bolts of searing energy burned into the walls, sending shrapnel flying. Riker returned fire, taking down one of the reptilian warriors with a clean shot to the throat. A Silari captain stepped forward, clad in ornate battle armor, its voice a low guttural growl. "Surrender, human. You cannot escape. Your war is over." Cade wiped blood from a cut on his cheek, smirking. "Not today." He slammed the detonator. The charges blew, ripping the massive hangar doors apart. The force of the explosion sent a shockwave through the room, throwing the Silari backward. The moment the dust cleared, Cade and his team sprinted into the hangar, where a rusted transport shuttle sat idle. "Get in," Cade shouted. Vale vaulted into the cockpit, bringing the engines online. The rest of the team piled inside, just as more Silari stormed into the bay. Leora, still unsteady, lingered at the ramp. "Leora," Cade yelled. Her head snapped up. She looked at him, looked past him, and then, with a shuddering breath, she sprinted aboard. The shuttle's engines roared to life, lifting off just as Silari guards opened fire. Plasma bolts sizzled against the hull, but then the ship shot forward, tearing out of the hangar and into open space. Behind them, alarms rang through Varkos Prime. The prison had fallen into chaos. The rebellion had just delivered a crushing blow. But as Cade exhaled, looking back at Leora, he knew something else had happened. She had touched the enemy's mind, and something had touched her back. This war wasn't just about weapons anymore. It was about control. The stolen shuttle streaked through the void, its engines howling as it tore away from Varkos Prime. Behind them, the asteroid prison shrank into the darkness, alarms still echoing through its comm channels. They had pulled off the impossible, again. But Cade didn't feel like celebrating. He sat across from Leora in the dimly lit cargo hold, studying her carefully. She had barely spoken since they left the prison. Her hands were clasped together, her breath slow and deliberate, as if she were trying to steady herself. But the occasional flicker of her cybernetic implants told him the battle inside her wasn't over. "You want to tell me what the hell happened back there?" Cade asked. Leora didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was hollow. "I felt them, Cade. The Silari. Not just their voices, their will." She shuddered. "They're not just a ruling empire. They control everything. Their soldiers, their ships, their slaves. They don't command them. They bend them." Riker leaned against a crate, arms crossed. "You're saying they have some kind of telepathic link?" "It's more than that," Leora murmured. "When I touched their network, I wasn't just listening. I was being pulled in." She swallowed hard. "And I don't think I came back alone." Cade and Riker exchanged a glance. "Are you compromised?" Cade asked bluntly. Leora's jaw clenched. "I don't know." The tension thickened. Every soldier aboard the Vengeance had fought against impossible odds to stay free. If the Silari had a way to control minds, even partially, it changed everything. Before Cade could press further, Vale's voice crackled through the comms. "Commander, you need to see this." Cade stood and strode to the cockpit, Riker and Leora close behind. When they arrived, Vale pointed to the radar display. A Dominion battleship had just dropped out of FTL, directly in their path. Cade's stomach tightened. "They tracked us." "They shouldn't have," Vale said, hands flying over the controls. "We've been running dark since we left. No signals, no beacons, but this thing jumped in like it knew exactly where we'd be." Cade turned to Leora. She looked just as horrified as he felt. "I didn't," she started, but before she could finish, the battleship's comms flared to life. A deep guttural voice filled the cabin. "Humans, your struggle is meaningless. Surrender your vessel. Deliver the corrupted one to us, and we may allow you to live." "The corrupted one," Riker muttered. His eyes snapped to Leora. She paled. "They mean me." Cade's mind raced. They weren't here for all of them. The Dominion wanted Leora. And somehow, they had known exactly where to find her. "Vale," Cade said, his voice ice-cold. "Get us out of here. Now." The Vengeance spun, its engines roaring as it prepared for an impossible escape. But in the back of his mind, Cade knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just a battle anymore. The Dominion had a way inside. The Vengeance shuddered violently as it banked hard, engines roaring in protest. Behind them, the Dominion battleship loomed, its weapon systems locking onto their position. "Brace," Vale shouted. A barrage of plasma lanced through the void. The first shots missed, but the next rocked the ship, sending sparks cascading from the consoles. The warning klaxons blared. Shields at 40%. Cade grabbed the back of Vale's chair, steadying himself. "We need an FTL jump. Now." "I'm trying." Vale barked, his fingers flying across the controls. "They've got some kind of gravity snare. We're caught." Another impact sent the ship spinning. Riker cursed, gripping the bulkhead. "We can't outrun a battleship in a straight fight." Cade knew he was right. The Vengeance had speed and stealth, but against a fully armed Dominion warship, they might as well be throwing rocks at a fortress. Then the enemy comms flared to life again. "Elias Cade." Cade stiffened. The voice was deep, distorted, but familiar. "You cannot run. We have already won. You will deliver the corrupted one, or your entire crew will die." Silence fell in the cockpit. Everyone turned to Leora. She was trembling. "They're in my head," she whispered. "They're inside." Cade's gut twisted. He had fought the Exilari for years, seen their cruelty, their enslavement of humanity. But this was something worse. They weren't just hunting rebels anymore. They were taking them. "No one's getting delivered," Cade growled. "Vale, can we break the snare?" Vale exhaled sharply. "Only if we can disrupt their targeting systems. Buy ourselves a few seconds." Riker cracked his knuckles. "I know just the thing." He darted toward the weapons bay. Moments later, he was back, clutching a Xelari warhead, one of the many stolen explosives the rebellion had hoarded. "Stick this to a fuel pod, launch it like debris, and when they pull it in, boom," he said with a grin. Cade smirked. "Do it." Riker sprinted to the launch bay. Within seconds, the Vengeance ejected the modified fuel pod, spinning aimlessly toward the Dominion ship. The enemy took the bait. Tractor beams flared as the battleship pulled the debris in. "Detonating," Riker said over comms. A flash of fire erupted in space. The warhead ignited the ship's shielding systems in a surge of energy, disrupting the gravity snare for 3 seconds. It was all they needed. Vale yanked the throttle, and the Vengeance surged forward, engines flaring. The FTL drive roared to life, and just as another volley of plasma fire lanced toward them, they vanished into the void. The cockpit fell silent. The only sound was the hum of the ship, safely in hyperspace. Cade exhaled, then turned to Leora. "They won't stop coming," he said quietly. Leora met his gaze, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know." And for the first time, Cade wasn't sure if she was talking about the Dominion or herself. Hyperspace stretched endlessly around the Vengeance, the swirling blue currents offering a temporary refuge from the Dominion's grasp. But inside the ship, the real battle was just beginning. Cade found Leora sitting alone in the war room, staring at the faint glow of the holotable. The usual fire in her eyes was gone, replaced by something else, something distant. "We need to talk," he said, stepping forward. She didn't look at him. "I know." Riker and Vale entered behind him, weapons at their sides, but not raised. "Not yet. You led them to us," Riker said, his voice firm but not accusing. "Didn't you?" Leora flinched, not by choice. She lifted her gaze, pain flickering behind her eyes. "They're inside my head, Riker. The moment I touched their network on Varkos Prime, they latched on. And now, I don't know where I end and they begin." Silence hung between them. Cade leaned against the table. "Can they hear us now?" Leora hesitated. Then, after a moment, she shook her head. "Not yet. Not while we're in hyperspace. But they're waiting. The moment we drop out of FTL, they'll know exactly where we are." Vale cursed under his breath. "So we're just carrying a homing beacon around with us." Leora slammed her fist onto the table. "You think I don't know that? You think I want this?" She sucked in a shuddering breath. "I can feel them. Whispers, commands, like an itch in my brain I can't scratch. And worse, they can feel me too." Cade studied her. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then reached out, her fingers grazing the holotable's controls. The display flickered, then shifted into something new. Auxiliary fleet formation appeared in glowing red outlines: ships, supply routes, hidden installations, strategic points no human should ever have access to. "This," Leora said, voice barely above a whisper, "is everything they know." Riker's eyes widened. "You stole this from them?" "No." Leora's voice was almost hollow. "They gave it to me. Or maybe I took it without realizing it." Her hands trembled. "And I don't know if that means I'm winning against them." She looked up, fear in her eyes. "Or if I'm already lost." Cade exhaled, running a hand through his hair. This was bigger than anything they had faced before. If Leora could access the Dominion's mind, even in fragments, she was their greatest weapon. But if the Auxiliary could do the same to her, she was also their greatest threat. Riker finally spoke. "We need a solution, Cade. Fast." Cade nodded, thinking hard. They had one shot at this. If Leora was right, the moment they left hyperspace, the Dominion would come for them. He turned to Vale. "Change course. We're not going back to the fleet." Vale frowned. "Then where are we going?" Cade's jaw tightened. "To the one place the Dominion doesn't control." Riker's eyes widened. "You mean?" "Yeah," Cade said. "Earth." The Vengeance hurtled through hyperspace, its engines strained from the forced course correction. The decision to head for Earth had been made in seconds, but its consequences could last a lifetime. No one had been back to humanity's homeworld in decades. The Dominion had left it in ruin, stripping it of resources and declaring it an abandoned world, unfit for habitation. But Cade knew the truth. Earth wasn't dead. It was just forgotten. And right now, forgotten was exactly what they needed. Leora sat quietly in the war room, her fingers digging into her arms as if holding herself together. She hadn't spoken since revealing the Auxiliary fleet data. Cade knelt beside her. "How are you holding up?" She let out a dry laugh. "I don't even know what normal feels like anymore." She tapped her temple. "They're still there, waiting. And when we drop out of FTL, they'll find us. No matter where we go." Cade frowned. "Then we need to make sure they don't follow." Riker entered, holding a datapad. "Good news and bad news. Good news, we're coming up on Earth. Bad news, the Dominion's got a sensor net around the entire solar system. We drop out of hyperspace, and we'll light up every screen in their fleet." Cade exhaled sharply. "What about stealth entry?" Vale's voice crackled over the ship's comms. "I've been working on that. We can burn our engines cold, drift in slow, but we'll only get one shot at this. If they detect us before we hit the atmosphere, we're dead." Cade turned back to Leora. "We need you to block them." She blinked. You want me to. What? Jam the Dominion's network? Cade, I can barely keep them out of my head. I don't even know how this connection works. You hacked them without trying before, Riker pointed out. What if you do it on purpose? Leora shook her head. It's not hacking. She swallowed. It's feeling. Their thoughts, their willpower. It's like standing in a storm that wants to consume you. Cade placed a hand on her shoulder. Then fight the storm. She let out a shaky breath. And if I lose? Cade didn't hesitate. We won't let you. For a long moment, Leora was silent. Then she closed her eyes, exhaled slowly, and nodded. Fine. Let's do this. The ship shuddered as hyperspace disengaged. Outside, Earth loomed. A darkened planet, its surface scarred from orbital bombardment, its once thriving cities reduced to skeletal ruins. It was a graveyard, a memory, but it was still home. Lyra's implants flared as she reached out with her mind. Cade could see the strain on her face, her hands clenched into fists. The moment they entered real space, the Dominion's presence slammed into her, searching, hunting. Leora gritted her teeth. I won't let you in. The ship surged forward, undetected. For the first time in history, humans were returning to Earth. The Vengeance plunged through Earth's atmosphere, its hull rattling from the sheer force of re-entry. Smoke and fire trailed behind the ship as it cut through the abandoned skies, heading toward the desolate ruins of humanity's once great homeworld. Inside the cockpit, Vale wrestled with the controls. Engines are fried from the burn. We're coming in hard, braced for impact. Cade gripped the bulkhead. Put us down in the ruins, somewhere with cover. Vale didn't answer. He was too busy keeping them alive. The ship screamed through the sky, finally slamming into the cracked remains of an ancient metropolis. Buildings, long hollowed out by time and war, crumbled under the force of the crash. Dust and debris filled the air as the Vengeance carved a path of destruction before skidding to a stop. Silence. Then, Leora gasped. Cade turned to her immediately. Are they here? Her breath was shallow, her cybernetic implants flickering wildly. They're coming. They know I fought them. They know where we are. She clenched her fists. I can hear them screaming. Riker cursed. We just crash-landed on the only planet in the galaxy without a standing army. If they send a fleet. We're not alone, Cade interrupted. The others turned to him, confused. Cade gestured toward the viewport. Look. Through the dust and wreckage, figures emerged from the ruins. Humans. They were scared, armored in salvaged gear, their eyes filled with a hard, relentless fire. Some carried ancient rifles, others wielded weapons of Sci-Fi design. They moved with discipline, with purpose. Lyra's voice was barely a whisper, the resistance. An older man, clad in a battered officer's coat, stepped forward. His gray beard was streaked with dust, his face weathered but unbroken. He studied Cade and his team before finally speaking. We saw your crash from miles away. Thought you were Dominion at first. His gaze landed on Leora, then softened. But now I see. You're something else entirely. Cade stepped forward. Elias Cade, Rebellion. We came here because we had no other choice. But if you're still fighting, then maybe we do. The old soldier smirked. Earth never surrendered. We just let them believe we did. Before Cade could respond, Leora suddenly collapsed to her knees, clutching her head. Her implants flared, her entire body trembling. They're here, she gasped. They've sent a dreadnought. Above them, the sky ripped apart as a massive Dominion warship descended, blotting out the sun. Its weapons charged, prepared to erase the last remnants of human defiance. Cade looked at the resistance fighters, then at his own team. He could see it in their eyes. They wouldn't run. He turned to Leora. Can you stop them? She met his gaze, her implants glowing brighter than ever. I don't know, she whispered, but I can try. And as the Dominion prepared to strike the final blow, humanity rose for its last, greatest battle.